do was just perhaps to have a little bit of a conversation. We actually don't have a huge amount of time before lunch, and this is always the worst session to stand between an audience and lunch, especially at the end of a couple of days of a conference such as this. But one kind of point I wanted to make was that compliance is often seen within an organisation as essentially the business prevention department, the department that within an organisation that exists to hold up a company's expansion and to put the brakes on, in the view of many within an organisation, slightly unnecessarily. Our view is quite the opposite, that actually compliance can be a great enabler for business and can, if you do it right, and align your own approach to doing business in a market like India to international best practice in the form of the UK Bribery Act, the FCPA. It can enable you to do business in an effective way that enables you to make money and grow and expand, but also in an ethical way. And that is often quite a difficult thing to square, and it really does depend on the kind of sector that you're operating in. Some sectors, as we've already said, are slightly more exposed to corruption than others. But Vidya, perhaps if I was to ask you a question, how many of your conversations at Grant Thornton revolve around not really the theory of, what is a proportionate policy or code of conduct, or sometimes the obsession with gifts and entertainment, because that I think obsesses many, perhaps much more than actually the people that run the Serious Fraud Office, for example, in the UK, actually would actually care for. How many of your conversations actually revolve more around the practical realities of how, for example, if you're a liquor company and you're looking to ship a shipment of beer from Maharashtra to Delhi, and you have to sign 15 different export licenses in that process, how you actually get past the potential for extortion demands to come into play with your interface with various customs and excise officials, for example, during that process? I mean, how practical do your conversations get?
Initially, the discussions would always used to be on gifts and entertainment. Now I think more and more it's on either import or export, right? So on the shipments which are getting held up, and particularly I think in three industries. One, pharmaceuticals, because a lot of the drugs are imported and they're very high value. They also need to be stored at appropriate conditions and in appropriate temperature. So if you ever go to the Mumbai port, it's just very sad and horrifying to see. I've gone there a couple of times, right? So how these medicines and shipments worth millions of pounds are just thrown about, and they really have to get cleared in 8 hours, because otherwise the medicine's not effective and the vial is just useless after that. So that's the biggest challenge for pharmaceutical companies, and many of them I think have they've realized that all of them faced the problem. Before they were alone. Now I think many have realized they're all in it for together, and they've started using also customs agents. Now you have a choice, right? Before it used to be that you had to use small mom and shop operators who really didn't have any focus in the UK. They would give you any certification you wanted. They would nod and say no, they don't make payments, but then they would get the goods released in like 4 hours. So there's something going on, but you can't really put your fingers on it. So many of them now have moved to large customs operators, whether it's a DHL or a FedEx or a UPS or other clearing services, who also have to comply with the UK Bribery Act. And many have gone and made individual representations, and they've gotten, I think, customs, at least particularly for pharmaceuticals, has become much more streamlined. So it's now all automated, and if you get the right customs classification, chapter, etc., and they get the paperwork started. So one of the things companies were doing was that even after the shipment has left, only after the shipment arrives, because customs used to be, a fairly junior task. It wasn't really seen as a task, which was very important. So that now I think organizations realize that if they have to do this without having their shipment getting stuck for more than 4 or 8 hours, it needs to get the right level of attention in the organization. So you can't just give it to someone, at 8 levels down in your organization, and he just doesn't realize the importance of it, and he'd start filling in the documentation after the goods have already arrived. Whereas you could have done this documentation, you know, before the goods left, either the UK or Switzerland or wherever they left, because you have that information. They start preparing their documentation much ahead in advance. They make sure that all their customs classifications proper, get that pre-cleared, with the customs window, and it's all automated. So when the shipment arrives, all you do is make the payment, and it gets cleared, and it's all automated. So you don't even have to physically send somebody. So that's been a tremendous level of improvement, both I think at the private side and the government side.
Yeah, absolutely. And Kia, how would you sum up from the perspective of the Companies Act, the general approach of UK companies at the moment towards the Act, and just how aware they are of the provisions and the potential liability that might exist for them if they are not actually adhering to the letter of the law?
Yeah. So if I need to put, if a UK company would like to now do business in India, obviously there are more control mechanisms have come in the place, which was not there in the previous act, which gives obviously a kind of disadvantage to the company because they need to comply with, but it also gives a more advantage to a controller or to a promoter or to a director, saying that its company is running in the right direction. Because once you have all this direction towards the control, and audit committee or your internal committee is approving that, your auditor is verifying that, you are writing a certificate, your CFO is signing. So in substance, what has made now that each individual at respective level, they all are approving the company is behaving in a right manner, which gives nothing but a control or a kind of smoothing aspect to a promoter or to a shareholder outside India, that my company is behaving in a right manner and my money is applied to a true channel. With IFRS bringing in India, the converged accounts in India is known as Ind AS, which is nothing but an IFRS account, which is similar to UK FRS, or 130 countries are in IFRS. Apart from the control aspects, even the companies are now going to prepare accounts which is a universal same language. So the global accounting language from India perspective is also going to be Ind AS for all the companies whose net worth is more than 250 crores or a listed company, despite of any net worth. So if you have an investment in this kind of a company, or you want to start up your company, you can compare your Indian company's accounts with global accounts, and you can have a benchmark with even other Indian competitors that how your company is performing. So I believe, though there are more mechanism has placed, obviously penalty and provisions have improved a lot as compared to the old act. Imprisonment in terms of fraud is goes to 10 years to the imprisonment. Three times of the amount what fraud has been detected. So the penalty imprisonment has gone to a high level, which in substance put controls on a better placement and will not have more kind of a fraud coming later part of the company's operation. So I believe it's a good show on both the way.
Vijay, we were talking about just before we started the session about there perhaps being a rather broad narrative at the moment, which is essentially that since Modi came to power a year and a half ago, there have, broadly speaking, been a number of improvements at a kind of government machinery, central bureaucratic level, in the way that in terms of the corruption levels. That's obviously very anecdotal, but still I think there is a broad perception that there has been some improvement. And we were talking about, set against that, the realities of actually doing business on the ground having not really changed that much. And you talked about a couple of examples of where actually there have been a few positive changes on the ground, depending on the sector that you're operating in, over the last 18 months or so.
Yeah, that's true. I think some of the changes have been, at different states. At the state level, I think on land, I know at least in Karnataka or Bangalore, you can get all of your property title records verified online. So you can really verify if you're entering into a transaction and you're looking at a land deal. You can look at the history of acquisition of that land, how many times the property changed, was property tax paid properly, are there any disputes? So all of that has been automated. I think similarly in Tamil Nadu, a lot of the industrial approvals have automated, and the state has set up special zones for industrial development, and they have their own version of the land acquisition bill, even though it's kind of stuck at the center. So, and of course, Gujarat always had, even before Modi became prime minister. So, the state had a lot of quick approvals. I think you saw a lot of investment in that particular state, particularly automobiles and chemicals. So the states are individually taking their own measures, and in some sense, it's competing for investment, particularly post 2008. The states had to compete amongst themselves, and some states took the lead, and some are now starting to. So, but you do see action at the state level. The one challenge universally among all states has been the Pollution Control Board. I am yet to see a state where that works seamlessly. There are undue requirements, obligations which are not even in the state pollution control board. Lots of requirements which don't seem to even be in the act, almost at ransom level. So the pollution control aspects across states haven't moved much, but otherwise I think at least on land industrial approvals, many of the states are automated those. Even I think on the FRRO reporting, which for foreigners have to go and report themselves. I've heard Mumbai is, maybe you have to do that, but Mumbai has been really difficult, the FRRO ones. Bangalore has not been that bad. Chennai, I think, is not bad. Again, it's relative. So I think if you've done it in Mumbai, it's a breeze in Chennai or Bangalore. Maybe you don't have to ever do it in Mumbai.